And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Wednesday, March 6th, 2013, middle of the week, hump day. Getting ready for that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another weekend. Also, the anniversary of the fall of the Alamo for all of you of our audience down there in Texas. And a little bit of history there. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room today, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. The stock market is up even higher today than it was yesterday, and everybody's waving the pom-poms. This is great. It's wonderful. The markets are up. And actually, it's kind of struggling. It is above yesterday's numbers, but it's not soaring up. There's a lot of volatility there, and everybody's buying in, and they're all excited about it. And this is a classic bubble pattern, where the higher the price of an asset, the more desirable, the greater the demand would be. It's the inverse of the normal supply and demand law of economics. And it's always the hallmark of a bubble, whether it's tulip mania, the real estate bubble of 2008, and now we're seeing it again here in the stock market. Now, analysts outside of Wall Street, Washington, D.C., and the corporate media are all waving red flags, but the people in the market, they're just so excited. Their money junkie addiction has just got them under so much control that they just keep on going. They're being driven by their addiction, not by common sense here. Now, over at Ex-Republic TV, Rick Santelli and Charles Biederman are pointing out the fact the stock market's rise is being powered by the Federal Reserve's cheap money. The stock prices are almost completely unconnected with the actual worth of the stock itself, the company's profitability, productivity, and so forth. This is pure, rampant speculation, and the way the mechanism works is classically simple. And all it is the Federal Reserve is lending money at very, very low rates. And so the speculators will go to the bank and they'll get a huge loan for a couple of $1 million at 2% interest. I'm just pulling these numbers out of the air. And they'll go invest in the stock market with the idea that a week from now they'll sell the stock and they'll have enough money to pay back the bank loan and the 2% interest and a little bit more that they get to put in their pocket. That's what market speculation is. You're not buying and selling the stocks for the underlying value and the dividends. You're just buying it now to sell it a few days, a few weeks down the road to make a quick profit on the stock's price. And because of the Federal Reserve's cheap money, easy available money, they figure I can sell the stock for 5% over what I paid for it, give the bank their 2%, and I get 3% to put in my pocket for having done nothing more than type a few numbers into a keyboard. And it's clearly out of control. It cannot be sustained. This idea of buying the stocks and selling them in a couple of weeks to pay back the loans plus interest and keep a little profit, that only works as long as stock prices keep going up forever. Same thing that was powering the real estate boom and bubble of 2008. People were buying houses in the morning and selling them at night. That's how crazy it got. It's a classic bubble. We know the stock market cannot keep on going up forever. There is a crash coming somewhere on the horizon. It's going to be a bad one, and this is probably a major reason the U.S. government's trying to take away all your guns, because we all know the government was supposed to keep these sort of things from happening. And they quit in 1999 with the repeal of Glass-Steagall. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about the soaring Dow. And the corporate media is just going on and on and on about this is a record for the Dow Industrial Averages. And as we mentioned earlier in the week, if you adjust for inflation and the declining value of the dollar, the stock market has been in a steady decline ever since 2000. And as a matter of fact, the Dow Industrial Averages are actually down 50% against gold since the last record Dow was set in October of 2007. And that tells you what's really going on. It's just the numbers are going up. As the dollars lose value, The reality is the stock market is not the wonderful producer that it is. The corporate media is going to tell you it is. They need you to keep your money in that stock market. Keep it propped up. Don't want you going to gold. And even with the artificial suppression of gold prices and all the games being played with the paper gold contracts, which are starting to make countries like Mexico and Germany and Switzerland very nervous about their bullion at the New York Federal Reserve, the reality is that the record Dow of, well, I guess today, because it's a little bit higher, is actually down 50% against gold since 2007. And so for anybody who's buying into this thing about silver and gold aren't great alternative wealth preservers. They're not really investments, they're just wealth preservers. They're hedges against inflation, which is clearly at work in this country. And you really ought to have some silver and gold. And again, Republic Trading Group, we've got a little banner for them on the right-hand side of whatreallyhappened.com, or you can go to republicbroadcasting.org. They've got a banner there. They will get you all set up. Make small, little, tiny purchases to stay under the radar, because I think at this point it's a foregone conclusion. If the government succeeds in getting away your guns, they're going to be coming for that gold next. Same thing they did in 1933, and for the same reason, have to save those banks. The bankers are most holy. You know, banks are held in higher esteem in this country than every religion. Ever notice how the buildings kind of look alike? I think one of the moments when I began to realize the reality of the banking system was way back when I was working on the Lost TV series, and we were using as a location one of the nicest banks in downtown Honolulu. And when you're in the customer area, it looks fabulous. And because of our shooting the episode of the TV show there, we were allowed access behind the counters and behind the desks. And it was pretty deteriorated. So it's all facade. They're going to make the banks look prosperous and healthy and trustworthy to the customers. And on the inside, it was actually pretty shabby. Alrighty, now then, some details. Apparently, investors' appetite for Apple has soured. Apparently, Apple stock has fallen 40% from its high, and people aren't really sure. But everybody's getting skittish out there, and they really should be. Now, you want to know what's really going on in the United States of America with the economy? The homeless population in New York City shelters has hit a record of 50,000. Now, that's the number of people they can count in the shelters, 50,000. There are thousands more who are sleeping down in the tunnels underneath the city, under bridges, whatever, anywhere they can get out of this horrible snowstorm that just hit. And experts are beginning to say the homeless population in New York is at, if not greater, than it was during the Great Depression of the 1930s. 21,000 children are sleeping on the at a city shelter, according to the Wall Street Journal. And what's Mayor Bloomberg doing about all this? Well, he's out there saying that the homeless, just like everybody else, will not be allowed to have a 2-liter soda with their pizzas, to prove that he is firmly in control and looking out for the welfare of the city. Now, we're getting this story, this came out of moneyjournal.com, where the holders of all these foreclosed properties that have been taken from Americans are now going to go into bulk foreclosure sales. They don't want to bother with selling one at a time. They're planning to sell off huge blocks, 250,000 foreclosed homes at wholesale prices to investors who will then turn them into rental properties. They claim this is to speed up the recovery of the housing market, and they're admitting to artificially push home prices higher. Because if home prices go into decline, all these properties on the balance sheets of the banks lose value and the banks become insolvent. Because if homeowners are paying a mortgage that is costing them more than the house is now worth, they'll voluntarily abandon. But the biggest reason to artificially push home prices higher, and they're admitting that's what they're trying to do, is because bankers and government need those home prices higher. The higher the property is worth, the more it's worth, the more your home is worth, the more the government gets property taxes. And banks get more wealth in interest on the home financing. If homes were inexpensive, and you would be surprised how little it actually costs to build a modern home. If homes were inexpensive and you could pay them off in just 5 or 10 years, then you'd be free of the bankers and no more use to them. Debt slaves are never allowed to live free. The goal is that you will spend your entire life working to pay off the loan on your home. The word mortgage comes from two root words, mort, meaning death, and gage, meaning a promise or a pledge. A mortgage is a promise that in exchange for being allowed to sit in this building, you will work and give the proceeds of your work to the bankers until you are dead, or until you're too old to be of no more use to them. That's why housing prices are always going up. You're not actually paying the value and worth of the house. You're paying the accumulated interest payments for the house's previous owners. And they're greatly inflated. In fact, over at internetpost.net, they have an article that the housing market manipulation is far worse than what we saw with Enron, that was manipulating the electricity market to make billions of dollars. We know everything is rigged in the economic sector. LIBOR was being rigged. Mortgage-backed security, fraud. Why not housing? The more you can drive the housing prices up, the harder people have to work to be in one and turn that money over to the bankers. If you're a homeowner paying a mortgage, you really ought to go and take a look at all those monthly payments over the term of the mortgage and figure out how much interest you're paying on that original house purchase. And you're going to come out with a shock. The banker, in exchange for ink and paper or typing on a computer, makes more money from you than the people who actually built that house. The actual physical production of the house is a small part of its cost. The rest is all manipulation and exploitation to keep you debt slaves until you die. So, looking at the actual numbers, the stock market is doing really well, and the corporate media is trying to convince America that this means the economy is doing really, really good. But if you look at the actual numbers, people are raiding their 401ks to pay their bills at an alarming rate. Incomes are stagnated. Your actual earnings have gone down $4,000 since the beginning of the crisis when you account for inflation. And you go back and you look at that last peak in 2007, and they're saying, huzzah, huzzah, the stock market's back up. Meanwhile, since 2007, gas has risen from $2.75 a gallon to $3.73 a gallon. If you can find it at that, it's over $4 here. GDP growth back in 2007 was 2.5%. It's down to 1.6%. Unemployed Americans back then was 6.7 million. Now they're saying it's 13.2 million. We actually know it's quite a bit higher because of the invisible unemployed. People out of work so long they've fallen off the end of the system. Americans on food stamps in 2007, 26.9 million. Now it's 47.6 million. Greater than the entire population of Spain. And the numbers go on and on. Consumer confidence back then was 99%. Now it's down to 69% and falling. The only economic indicators that are looking good are the stock market. And we know they're rigged for that purpose to use as a political banner. It started back in the Clinton administration. Now, interestingly enough, and this is a story that came out from the Trenches World Report, an internal government email sent on Monday was leaked out instructing an official within a subdivision of the U.S. Department of Agriculture to make sure that the sequester-related cuts were as painful as possible, caused as much harm as possible, to make sure that the Department of Agriculture is not contradicting what the White House predicted the impact would be. In other words, having overstated the harm of the sequester cuts, The Obama administration is now telling federal government agencies, when you make your cuts, make them hurt, so that it looks like we were accurate when we said it was going to be painful. They're intentionally magnifying the damage for political gain. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So we're talking about this internal government email that got leaked, in which the Obama administration is telling government agencies, when they plan these mandated sequester cuts, to intentionally make them as painful on the people as possible, so that the Obama administration's dire warnings seem to have been accurate. A lot of people are saying they overstated. It was scare tactics. And now we have the Obama administration saying intentionally hurt the American people with these cuts so that the president can look good. Because the president is always right, even when he's wrong. Citing the sequestered budget cuts, they're looking at closing some airport control towers. Some of them actually are obsolete, as control has gone from the local airports more toward these larger area FAA control centers. So, again, this is like, see, we were right there. And they have now announced that tours of the White House are canceled for budget cuts. Now, I think the reality there is Obama is rapidly becoming afraid of the American people. And they don't want anybody in the White House. Now, I assume drug smugglers can still get in, like they did under the Clinton administration. If you remember those photos that surfaced of a known cocaine smuggler, Jorge Cabrera, and dedicated Democratic donor. And he got invited to the White House Christmas party, and he posed with Hillary in front of the White House Christmas tree. So if you want to visit the White House, you can't do it as a tourist any longer. But if you're a drug smuggler and a donor, you will get in past the United States Secret Service Protective Detail. New data is showing the Eurozone is sinking deeper into recession. The economy's not improving over there. They just can't find that pesky 11th marble over there. And now France is starting to talk about leaving the European Union. It's starting to spread. And France appears to be preparing to leave the EU, abandon the euro, go back to the franc. And it's going to become a huge issue in the upcoming elections here. Now, the corruption in the European Union has reached staggering levels. They're now estimating that corruption costs are costing €1 trillion every single year, because the whole system has become corrupted by the money junkies. Same thing that we're seeing here in the United States of America. And perhaps not so coincidentally, and we're getting this from finance.yahoo, the banks are going to court to ask a judge to throw out all of these lawsuits arising out of the LIBOR rigging. These banks are facing a barrage of civil litigation from customers who lost money because of the interest rate rigging. And the lawyers for the banks are arguing the cases should all be dismissed, blanket dismissal, because there's no evidence of antitrust or other violations. In other words, they're trying to make the claim that rigging the LIBOR to make themselves rich at the expense of other people isn't actually technically illegal, and therefore the lawsuit should all be stopped. They may well find a sympathetic and friendly judge, especially one who owns stock in those banks. Now, we're dealing with the repercussions of the death of Hugo Chavez, and it is amazing to see the flood of propaganda that is already pouring onto the media to demonize Chavez, to demonize his government, to demonize his programs, to enrich the poor. And it's getting pretty extreme out there. A couple of things you need to remember. Hugo Chavez died undefeated. It doesn't, no matter how many times the corporate media called him a dictator, he won every election with overwhelming majorities because he was working for the people of his country. He survived nobody knows how many CIA-sponsored coup attempts. But the imperialists They're drooling. Venezuela is in play. And Venezuela has a lot of oil. They have a recoverable reserve of 1.36 trillion barrels. That's more than Saudi Arabia. They have a lot of gold down there in Venezuela. And you know how hungry the New York Federal Reserve is for a fresh source of gold bullion. And so we just see what's going on. The corporate media is talking about Chavez had a divided country. He left a divided nation. The only division was over who was going to benefit from the oil wealth. Chavez's attitude was the wealth of the nation belongs to the people of the nation. And he apparently, aloha America, welcome back to the show. And apparently, speaking to Congress, CENTCOM Commander General James Mattis insisted sanctions are not successful against Iran. Diplomacy is all but useless, insisting that Iran's history of deceit meant they can't be trusted. They're just pulling this stuff out of thin air. Says Iran must be brought to its knees. Now, Mattis conceded that he is paid to take a dim view of the Iranians. A little bit of moment of honesty. My paycheck depends on my promoting war with Iran. It's basically what he's saying. But he said Iran has to be brought to its knees and that open warfare is just one of the options being considered. And they're still pushing nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons, nuclear weapons. Now, Iran has not invaded another country in a war of aggression for over 200 years. They are obeying the rules of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They allow inspections, and the inspectors, rumor and innuendo aside, have found no evidence of weaponization. Although, given what happened to Iraq, Iran would be justified in having a nuclear weapon. And we know that even if they had a nuclear weapon, they're not going to initiate an attack against the United States of America or Israel. First of all, because it's not their historical trend. And second of all, because there would be overwhelming and instant nuclear retaliation from both Israel and the United States. It's not going to happen. They are not a threat to us in the nuclear sense. They're a threat as long as their oil is available for sale for currencies other than the dollar. And they're a political unifying force in the Middle East that Israel is very uncomfortable with. That's it. But they're still pushing this nuclear weapons of mass destruction, and you have to ask yourself, after the obvious debacle of claiming that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, why are they still playing that same card? Do they really think the American people are buying it? Do they not understand? We all know they lied to us about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, which means they're probably lying about Iran's weapons of mass destruction. And I'm beginning to wonder, there's this sort of self-feeding hallucination going on in Washington, D.C., where AIPAC screams about Iran's nuclear weapons, the Congress bangs their hands together like trained seals, and says, yes, Iran has nuclear weapons. The pollsters are running polls designed to create the illusion of massive public support for war with Iran. And it almost seems like our members of Congress are almost entirely cut off from the real America. And it raises a question. We know how almost completely Israel is in control of members of Congress. And I think the time is to ask how many of those congressional staffers are being influenced by Israel. Because we know one of the perks of being a big donor to a candidate is that your relations get hired into those staffing jobs. That's how Monica Lewinsky got into the White House. And so over and above wondering about AIPAC's influence over members of Congress, we have to start asking about Israel's influence over those staffers. Because those staffers are the gatekeepers and filters for members of Congress. These members of Congress rely on the staffers for the reports on what's going on in the world and how the American people feel about it. And if those staffers are all loyal to Israel and the war agenda, then Congress is completely clueless and out of touch with what's going on out here in America. And that's a very dangerous circumstance. because it could lead them to easily make a very dramatic mistake that could really make life interesting for us all. We're going to take a break for commercials. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over at Al Jazeera, they're reporting that the United States and Saudi Arabia are trying to present a united front against both Iran and Syria, saying that their patience has run out with Iran and its nuclear ambitions, which do not exist. And they're telling Syrian President Assad that they will increase support to the rebels, who are not really rebels, it's a hired mercenary army, unless he steps down. Now, at this point, how many invasions in are we? It is clear. We are into World War III. And the United States and Israel are the modern Axis powers, trying to project their will over the rest of the globe. And they're still waving around this idea that this is all about nuclear weapons, even though the claim about Iraq was proven to be a bald-faced lie. And you, as an American, ought to be insulted that these politicians seem to truly believe you are stupid enough to fall for the same lie over and over and over and over and over again. Clearly, they think you are idiots who believe everything you are told by the corporate TV media and don't have two brain cells to rub together to look at the obviousness of all of this. Or maybe they simply don't care. Or maybe they do care, and that's why they're arming the government and trying to disarm you. Because they're committed to this war policy. They're too far in. They can't stop, apologize, give Iraq back to the Iraqi people, and turn around and go back to status quo ante. This dollarification process of the globe has to be carried through to completion or defeat. And that's why we are irrevocably on this war to an on this road to an escalation of World War III. And they're just going to wave around nuclear weapons of mass destruction or saving the people from a cruel dictator. And if you're a loyal American, you will believe the bovine excrement. Because if you don't believe the bovine excrement, the terrorists will win. Going to go back to the phones here. Ed in Connecticut. Aloha, Ed. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Ed, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? It's you, Mike.
Yes, it is. You're on the air, and you might want to turn down your speaker in the background.
Okay. Well, my question is, Mike, when you have such tyranny happening from this president, and you have the Republicans and you have Democrats that are basically paid for by the elite, how is it going to be possible, with all that's going on, to impeach this president?
It's never going to happen. Impeachment would have to begin in the House of Representatives, and then there would have to be a conviction by the Senate. And this government is totally under the control of the money junkies. And according to an article that just came out in Press TV, they're pretty much all lackeys of the Israeli government, as the fight over Hagel's confirmation demonstrated to all, and the current conference at AIPAC is demonstrating to all. And after Hagel got confirmed, if you'll remember, I forecast AIPAC would just absolutely move to reassert complete dictatorial, tyrannical control over America's government. And that's what they're doing over there at their conference right now.
Yeah, it's been amazing since Kerry got in there that all of a sudden we're pushing a demand for war on Iran. It's insane. Why are we going to be doing this?
Well, it's because it's what Israel wants. And somebody just emailed me a link to an article. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But apparently Kerry's family is Jewish. His grandparents changed their name to Kerry. Apparently the majority of his staff at the State Department are pro-Israel as well. And it sort of gets right to the heart of what I was saying before about it's time to start looking at those congressional staffers to see how compromised they are.
I can hardly believe that the people of Iran want to cause so much harm in this country that this maniac that they say they have in there, and now we're getting fed a bunch of lies again from our politicians, just like we did in Iraq.
Well, we've been fed a bunch of about pretty much every war. We know that Pearl Harbor wasn't really a surprise. Roosevelt goaded the Japanese into it, and then hid the intelligence of the approaching Japanese fleet from Admiral Kimmel and General Short. We know there wasn't really a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor that destroyed the USS Maine. We know there really were not torpedoes at the Gulf of Tonkin chasing the USS Maddox around. It's lie after lie after lie after lie. They rule us with lies and deception. The difference is now we know it.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the internet, I mean, we would still be in the clouds. We wouldn't know what's going on.
That's absolutely right. The internet has literally changed the world. It's changed the fundamental flow of information in society as dramatically as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. And we're seeing the established power structure responding to the internet in pretty much the same way the established power structure of Gutenberg's time reacted to the sudden availability of inexpensive books spreading into the working classes. And
we also have to be very careful about people who go online and are kind of the contraband of the White House that try and twist all the words so that it sounds like that it's not really happening, or these people who are coming up with these truths are kind of like off the wall.
Oh, there's a huge propaganda effort online. Cass Sunstein, you know, he talks about his cognitive infiltration. We know public relations firms make a huge part of their business sending in operatives to chat rooms to try and push a particular agenda. But again, when we know that is being done, it loses its effectiveness.
Yeah, I kind of think that with all the monies that was pumped in through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s coming up there, we all got nice, fat, and happy, and we never paid attention to much politics, and that was enabling them to get into the school system and to actually mind-bend our children so they believe what they wanted them to tell. It's a complete brainwashing system.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Even the news.
It absolutely is. I remember when I was in grade school in New Hampshire, we had this social studies textbook. It was called Our American Heritage, and I remember it had a painting of a Mississippi riverboat on the cover, and there were these cartoons in there to demonize the communists and the Russians about how bad and evil they were. And I remember them very vividly, and it actually did succeed in tainting my view of Russians. Up until I started actually meeting some when I was with NASA, and they were nice people. They didn't just immediately try and rip off my head and do things down my neck. And again, the real-world experience was definitely 180 degrees out of phase with what the schools were teaching me to think about how Russians and communists were going to behave.
Right. When you really get a chance to be lucky enough to talk to the salt of the earth that are in these countries, it's a totally different program.
Oh, it very, very much is. And I remember many, many years ago when I was down in Australia looking to get some work at a company down there, the Australians they were trying to compliment me by saying that I was one of the most politically aware Americans they had ever met, because I knew what was going on in the country. Their view of most Americans who were coming down there as tourists is they were completely brainwashed and bamboozled by the U.S. government and the corporate media, and they didn't really have a clue what was going on in the world. That, too, has changed.
It's a shame. They also got taken with this gun collection thing, too, and now they're telling America, don't fall for it.
Oh, yeah. Crime went right through the roof down there, but then gun control is not about crime control. It's about people control.
Correct. I understand that. I've been following the politics, and I knew back before Obama got elected, I had told my son, I said, if this man gets in, we are in a world of trouble.
Well, the problem we had is it almost didn't matter which one got in. We're still going to be in a world of trouble. It just might be slightly different. Yeah.
Elite. I don't understand why people can't get these elite people and get rid of them.
Well, starting with the massive vote fraud. Look at how the corporate media ganged up to make sure that Ron Paul couldn't get anywhere near that nomination. If we remember the games they were playing at their own conventions, the Democratic convention, where there was a motion to put Israel back on the Democratic Party platform. It got voted down by their own elected delegates, and they still put it on there and just said, well, they're going to do what they're going to do. We have to we have been told by Israel that this must be part of our platform. And
So basically, if you listen to George Carlin and all the things he said, he was pretty much on for a comedian.
Oh, he was. Well, he was, as he got older, he started using his humor to make comments on society. And because it was humor, it was kind of hard to criticize him and censor him. Same thing with Michael Crichton. After he made all of his money, his later books were all amazing social commentaries about the danger of unrestrained corporatized science. I think one of my favorite books of his from that period was State of Fear, where he correctly predicted how the environmentalists and global warming was being exploited for money and political power. These are people that, we don't realize what they were and how important they were until after they were gone. And I certainly miss Carlin for what he was saying.
Right. He was full of energy as far as getting rid of the ideas that the government just gives us gifts and that we're just perpetrating their lies for them. It's crazy. It
is. It's absolutely insane. But it's changing rapidly. Rasmussen the other week pointed out that more people are now coming to the alternative media, to the Internet, to get their political news than to the corporate media. So we're actually the new mainstream right here at Republic Broadcasting. Thank you for the call. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm watching in the corporate media where Washington State is having some difficulty obtaining a pot czar. I would nominate Tommy Chong. He's definitely an expert here. Going to go back to the phones. John in New York. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Michael, good show as usual, but I'd like to change this from the alternative media to the independent media, because that's what you guys are, all right? So I'd like to rename it, because I think the, alternative media has a stigma to it. So let's just call it the independent media.
I agree with you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now let's get to John Kerry. Your caller brought something up. Maybe you aren't knowledgeable about this, but John Kerry's grandparents were in fact Jewish. Their last name was Cohen, spelled with a K, K-O-H-N. His grandfather, Frederick Kerry, was born Frederick Cohn, and he changed his name in 1902 and immigrated to the United States in 1905 and committed suicide in a Boston hotel in 1921. And when this revelation was brought to him by the Boston Globe that that hired a genealogist, Kerry was quite surprised and said, this is an unbelievable revelation. Incredible stuff is what he told the Globe. Mm-hmm. I think it's more than interesting. It's a revelation, quote unquote, from Kerry.
Wait a minute. I have to call on this one because I know, having had grandparents myself, if I'd had a grandparent who committed suicide, I would certainly know about it. I'm not buying this idea that Kerry was not aware of the history of his own family one generation previous. That is just not believable.
Well, according to a couple of articles that I've read, basically his name was Cohen. His brother basically switched to Judaism, his current brother. You see him in parades over here in wonderful Jew City, New York, marching with the Star of David. He has basically switched from Catholicism to Judaism. Mm-hmm. John Kerry has been a practicing Catholic. Basically, he's just a crypto Jew, as they call it. Mm-hmm. And whether his parents committed suicide, God only knows. But this is what the Boston Globe came up with, mm-hmm. and it's an article that can be seen at rents.com. And basically, he's been hiding this stuff for a long time. I don't believe that he didn't know about whether he was Jewish or not.
Yeah, I'm not buying that one that he didn't know about his own grandparents because, that strains credibility. Or if his memory is that bad, he's not qualified to be Secretary of State.
He's not qualified anyway.
That's
all right,
true.
Thanks, Michael. You be blessed.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Renee in North Carolina. Aloha, Renee. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, unfortunately, because I recently heard this going on the other network, some of the bovine excrement comes out of Patriot Radio. This whole thing about socialism being the problem, is coming up with Chavez and stuff. Well, to me, it's fascism, okay? Particularly, that whole socialism plays into the bias that, it's poor people that are taking all our money. And, unless you start defining socialism, and we know, the ones that have studied this harder knows that the socialism that funnels the money to the rich is much larger amounts than the money that goes to the poor. They only give the poor, and it's not out of kindness. It's just that they feed them just enough to control them, not because they give a damn about them.
Well, that's pretty much true of every financial system, communist,
right.
fascist, or capitalist.
Oh, I agree with you. And you see, all these people who talk about it a lot of times, not, staying out of the right-left paradigm, in the next 10 seconds, they're playing the right-left paradigm. And so the thing is, it's coming up, this whole thing with Chavez and socialism, blah, blah, blah. I know I've gone to school with people and worked in areas that catered to people who, I've met people, wealthy people from South America and Mexico, and I can tell you the wealthy ones are white. Because they're wealthy, because they are the descendants of the conquerors. Okay?
Yeah.
You rarely meet a short, brown, wealthy one. So these poor people down there...
It's not just down there. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're almost to the end of the segment. We have the same situation here in Hawaii, where the wealthiest citizens are the descendants of the Christian missionaries. And the indigenous Hawaiian people, for the most part, are pretty much... out there on the fringe. So, yeah, we see that here as well. Now, the reason they're screaming socialist and communist about Chavez is not because he necessarily was, but because the masters of propaganda in this country are still hopelessly trapped back in the 1950s and 1960s, where Americans were brainwashed by the schools to soil themselves when they heard those words, communist and socialist. But because that kind of brainwashing went away with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the younger population aren't responding to those buzzwords, and apparently our masters of propaganda are picking up on that, and it's another indication of how out of touch they really are with mainstream America. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Back to the phones. Jerry in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. You had a caller a little while ago asking why can't we impeach this guy, and you said, well, it's got to start in the House and then go to the Senate in order to get it done. I was going to ask you, have you ever heard about the Emergency Banking Act declared by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, March 9th, 1933?
Yes.
48 statutes /1 of the Claw, 89/179, House Joint Resolution 192 of the 73rd Congress in session, June 5th, 1933, to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the clause, or the gold clause. Dissolve the foreign or sovereign authority of the United States in the official capacities of all United States governmental officials, officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States federal government will exist in name only.
Well, I don't think it actually says that last part within the legislation, but basically what was going on was, starting in 1913, the Federal Reserve had taken over control of the nation's economy from the U.S. government, which should have taken a constitutional amendment, but that's another story entirely. But that's a big part of what Roosevelt did, is he basically abandoned what little controls the federal government had over the banking system and the nation's money supply at that point.
It didn't suspend the Constitution or the Congress or the Senate?
I don't see it as doing that, basically only in terms of its financial controls over the nation's economy.
Okay, because I've been trying to figure out why these guys have just been running law. I mean, these presidents over the past several years, and several presidents anyway, and nobody has ever stepped in to question this.
Well, they're all part of that same system. And to try and provoke a confrontation or a crisis over some of these constitutional issues borders on delegitimizing the entire government. And they don't want to risk their own paychecks and their own office and their own privilege. They're all lusting for that Oval Office themselves. And this whole political process is a gigantic filtration system where anybody who's out here in regular America can, with hard work and truth-telling and grassroots support, win a first term in Congress. But from that point on, because you're in Washington, D.C. and not in your home district all that much, you become dependent on the political machine, certainly upon the corporate donors and AIPAC if you want any higher offices. And so by the time you get to be a senator or looking out at a campaign for the White House itself, you've basically already made that decision that you're going to do what the people with the money and the influence are going to tell you to do. And again, look what happened to Ron Paul. But I don't see this. I don't see this Congress even bringing up the topic of Obama's impeachment. He's already committed several things that could have been impeached. They don't want to do it because they themselves are all beneficiaries of this system. And right now, I would expect that Obama has succeeded in scaring Congress that if there is a confrontation with the American people, members of Congress are going to be targets as much as the president, and that's why they're willing to go along with NDAA and drone strikes over the American people.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you cleared that up. Thank you.
All right.
Have a great day.
Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. All right, getting over to some other parts of the world. Apparently, there was an email that supposedly came out from the European Union. It was published in a Greek newspaper where there was this warning issued by the EU Commission to its own staff concerning safety instructions regarding travel into Greece, warning that there were going to be violent riots, including a lot of dead people, in Greece sometime in March. Now, the EU has now backed off and said it's probably a hoax. We don't acknowledge it. But I think it's pretty obvious that Greece is heading toward a crisis, and apparently there was a bomb scare in Athens where somebody called the police and said there will be multiple bombings at 11 in the morning, and the police did in fact find 4 different explosive packages. Now, maybe the phone call was made by somebody getting cold feet over the violence, or maybe it was just an attempt to garner newspaper attention. But very obvious, Athens has reached the breaking point. The Greek people understand their current government is not of their own choosing. During their elections last year, they chose an anti-banker, anti-austerity government. The pro-banker politicians refused to form a coalition to force a second election. The second election was marked by rampant, open, and obvious vote fraud. There were reports of ballot boxes from anti-banker districts literally being burned in public. And the Greek people understand their government is not working for the Greek people or the Greek nation. Their government is working for the money junkies. And they're approaching a breaking point there. And again, getting back to that story about trillion-euro corruption throughout the European Union, the Greek finance minister, Venizelos, not to be confused with the country, is accused of attempting to use bribes to hasten the Greek exit from the euro. And I'm not sure about the machinations of this because the original article was in Greek, and I don't speak Greek, at least not recently. And also he's under fire because apparently he was one of the people who was caught lying to get an IMF rescue. So Papandreou was not the only one who was trying to conceal Greece's financial desperation in order to seek additional funding. Now, getting down to Israel, a lot of criticism has been leveled at Israel for its policy of segregated buses. One bus for the Israelis and one bus for the Palestinians. And we've seen that segregation all over. It is obviously an apartheid state. There are Jews-only roads paid for by American taxpayers. We know that the cars have color-coded license plates, depending upon whether you're Jewish or something else. And the something else always get pulled over in the border crossings for enhanced examination. Now, over in where Abraham is buried, they are now setting up 2 separate roads leading to the tomb of Abraham, one for Jews and one for Palestinians. And so they're pursuing a policy of apartheid, and every time the world criticizes it, They scream, oh, you're just being an anti-Semite. Boy, the phone lines are really busy today. We're going to go back to Bob in Michigan. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Love your show. All your information, everything is terrific. With regards to your previous caller, just a quick notation for him. There's a site called barefootsworld.net, and they have a chronology of what Roosevelt did from 33 on. And it covers a lot of legislation and comments from various members of the House and Senate and so on and so forth. I don't know how accurate this stuff is. I mean, it's all over the internet, but I found it interesting reading. It's barefootsworld.net. So I'll just leave that with you, and it's a chronological record, supposedly, of what Roosevelt did, including selling off the property and all kinds of stuff, giving up our rights to ownership and all kinds of interesting things. So,
okay, could you give me that URL one more time, because I'm getting a server not found here.
Okay, Barefoots, plural, BAREFOOTS, world.net.
Ah, I mistyped. Okay, and now I'm getting it. All right, I will link that to what really
there's quite a bit of interesting reading in there. There's some books and so on and so forth. It's all online, and I printed out the opening thing, a special report on the national emergency of the United States of America. And you know, at some point in the future, I would really appreciate your comment on some of this stuff, because it's quite it's quite intense. It brings out a lot of stuff that I never heard of before.
Well, we know that presidents have been using the executive order rather fast and loose. There is no executive order in the Constitution. I agree. The original purpose of the executive order was to allow the president to carry out the will of the Congress, and Congress had 30 days to overturn a presidential executive order if the president was implementing something Congress did not agree with. Now, of course, presidents are using executive orders for stroke-of-the-pen law of the land purposes, and Congress is too cowed and cowardly to try and do anything about it. I mean, presidents are abusing the War Powers Act, and again, as long as Congress is so lusting for that Oval Office themselves that they don't dare anger the established political machine, they're not going to do anything about it. And
insofar as the War Powers Act is concerned, according to the information contained in from this web URL, it basically makes him a dictator and he can do what he wants. I mean, that's pretty.
Yeah, that absolutely is. But remember, when the War Powers Act was passed, it was in an era before instantaneous global communication, where the president needed the ability to deploy military action to deal with the crisis situation while waiting for Congress to convene and gather and decide whether a declaration of war was warranted. At this point in an era of global communication, it really is obsolete, but presidents continue to use it and rely on that 30 days of I can do whatever I want to do.
Yeah, I can find no record of it ever being rescinded. And according to this article, the only person that can do that is the president. So now I'm not claiming this is true. I'm just trying to pass along some information for the listeners out there, possibly to research.
Well, under the Constitution, the Congress can rescind the War Powers Act anytime they want to. Congress could rescind the Charter of the Federal Reserve anytime they want to. But they're not going to do it because those Wall Street financial institutions are very, very generous campaign contributors with that money that they've looted from the American people.
You into that. Well, thank you for your time, Michael.
All right. You know, if you really think about it, our present political system, if you take the names out of it, it operates very much like medieval Europe. The lower officials loot money from the common people and pass it up the chain. Yeah. Until it reaches the king or the emperor.
Yeah, well, I'm not happy living in a fiefdom.
No, I'm not either. I refuse to live on my knees, mostly because...
You got that right, brother. I've got blood relative connection all the way back to both the Declaration and the Constitution.
Well, you're one up on me. You're one up on me because one of my ancestors signed the Declaration, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't have any relations who signed the Constitution.
They were brothers, and one signed the Declaration and the other signed the Constitution. So both from South Carolina, I believe it was.
Okay, well, congratulations
anyway.
on that one. Congratulations. All righty.
Well, I just feel a connection here, and I am just so sick of all of this ballyhoo that's going on in terms of trying to protect us against ourselves. I'm just fed up with it.
Well, I am too, and we were all taught a certain way to think about our nation, which may or may not have been true, but it was held up as an ideal. And I would very much like to see us get back to that ideal. And what we've got now, this is not it. This is not the
I would just like to see honest history be taught.
Well, that's why we've got this website here. We're trying to be as honest with history as we possibly can, which is why we're always getting nasty phone calls and nasty emails and hacker attacks and the rest of it. Got to let you go. We're getting close to the break, and I want to take another phone call before the commercial break. Tony in Connecticut. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Great show. Just a quick question, Mike. There's a lot of buzz going around the Internet. I think you even had a couple of posts on your website that the Chavez death may have been suspicious in nature. I know the vice president of Venezuela is questioning it, and some officials in Russia. My question is this: is it possible to induce a cancer upon a person, and in what method? Without getting too detailed, is it done through food, or if it is a conspiracy, how would they have accomplished such a thing?
Oh, there's a lot of ways to do it. I mean, there are all kinds of known carcinogens. I don't want to name any of them in case somebody gets a bad idea. But they can't find a cure for cancer, but boy, they sure know all the things that will cause it. And all you have to do is dose somebody with them. Some of them are like a guarantee. And we don't know what the CIA has developed as a cancer causer that is not even known to medical science at this particular point. And I'm not saying that Chavez was deliberately assassinated. What I'm saying is we can't rule it out.
Amazing, Michael. All right, well, very good. I was just blown away by it because I never knew such a technology exists, but then again, there's a lot of things I don't know.
Oh, there are all kinds of covert assassination weapons. I remember, I think it was back in the 70s, there were some hearings before Congress regarding, the enemy we faced in the Soviet Union, and they were showing around this little pen that would fire a blast of prussic acid into somebody's face to trigger a heart attack. And it came with sodium thiosulfate tablets, which the assassin would take so the prussic acid wouldn't affect them. And it also had an ampule of amyl nitrate to make sure the assassin wasn't killed by his own weapon. And they were blaming it on the KGB, and then later on it came out this was actually something the CIA had developed. So, this kind of... Think the Japanese ninjas. They had all these kinds of ways of killing people. It's been a feature of politics for a very long time. Pope Alexander VI died of being poisoned. He apparently grabbed the wrong goblet. He was trying to kill off somebody whose land he coveted and grabbed the wrong glass. In fact, little trivial question. Do you know why drinking vessels made out of horn were so popular with medieval nobility? Because
capsules made out of what?
Drinking vessels, like drinking horns or cups made out of horn. Because if you were being given cyanide, the horn would immediately turn yellow and give away the fact that you were being poisoned.
Oh, wow, Michael, you're just a wealth of trivial knowledge. I've never heard that before.
I am unbeatable at Trivial Pursuit. I'm the world champion. No, you.
Yeah, no, the silver goblets, I hear, act as antimicrobial, and that's why
right.
A lot of the aristocracies drink out of silverate, out of silver utensils, but the horn vessel is a new one on me, and I may need that someday if I ever go on Jeopardy. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, that is why the silver goblets are the traditional wedding present for young couples, so they can drink to each other's health. Tony, we're going to let you go here. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Going back to the phones, George in Texas. Aloha, welcome back. What's on your mind? George, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. What's on your mind today?
I'd like to know, I know you talk about, like, with the technology, how you have to waste your time with all this computer stuff.
Yes.
I don't know, I got a nasty attack on my computer, and I had contacted a website security company to clean out the malware, harden up my WordPress website, and they wound up making it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. We are dealing with a reality that all of us have become dependent on these systems that are not robust and not failure-proof, and it's affecting our overall nation's productivity. Yeah, a nation's productivity is only as good as the tools, and if the tools are being sold on the cheap and built on the cheap, you know, you're literally cutting your own future productivity as a nation. That's something else the U.S. government should have been looking at in terms of the long-term health of the nation. They should have restored product liability to computers and software companies years ago, but they don't do it. And that's one of the evils under fascism.
Well, like I say, I paid this company to have my website hardened.
Yes.
Like I said, and they made it worse. And it's like, I got to find someone who knows what they're doing. If anybody's out there, anybody know about WordPress or how to get into the root directory and figure out this problem, I'd be happy to hear your advice. You know what I mean? Because paying money for somebody to do it, they want you to buy more services.
Yeah, that's generally the thing. I actually went through some of that this morning, and I finally got my issue resolved. The people who really know how to make this stuff work, they've already left the country for greener pastures. The last expert I hired to work on my website destroyed a good part of it, and I still can't figure out what this guy did. And he cost me $1,000 into the process. And it's a two-pronged situation. The computer systems have become so overly complicated and multi-layered, and nobody's passing error messages back, and you can't find out what's going on. You'll just say, unknown error. I was going through that with Adobe Premiere the other day, trying to edit that last video that we just put up, and all I kept getting was, you know, unsupported compression, unsupported rate, and they won't tell you what the supported compression and rates are. You just trial and error it. And it's just a way of these computer software companies dumping their work onto you. You're working for free for them to find out the problems and report it back. And meanwhile, of course, other nations with a somewhat healthier attitude toward their workers are pulling ahead of us.
Well, Mike, I just can't wait till the system just comes crashing down.
It's on its way already. I mean, there are some days I miss my old Commodore 64 because that one person could comprehend, and if something was wrong, you could fix it. But these modern machines, there are so many layers and abstractions and all of this interacting stuff, and it's just, it really is a major problem to try and figure out what's going on. And, you know, again, gratuitously bashing Adobe. Ever since they went through this whole CS phase and they acquired Macromedia and tried to unify their user interface, it's much less usable than it was back in the days of like Photoshop 7. In fact, I have CS5, but I use Photoshop 7 for 90% of my work because it comes up faster and it's less problematic. Anyway, we're coming up on a station identification. George, we're going to let you go, and we'll be back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. Dan the Man is now in our control room. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We do have a couple of callers. I'm going to get to them real soon, but we're getting a story now that apparently the Syrian rebels, meaning the hired mercenary army, have captured 20 United Nations peacekeepers in the Golan Heights. Those UN peacekeepers are there, in theory, to keep Syria and Israel from getting angry with each other. And the Syrian rebels have taken them captive. The United Nations Security Council is demanding their immediate release. This is another public relations disaster for the hired mercenary army. It proves they are not a genuine popular uprising. They're there, hired and paid for, to overthrow Assad to make way for a new U.S. and Israeli-friendly puppet regime. Apparently, U.S. oil production is now surpassing that of Saudi Arabia's. And it underscores the fact that the conquest of these oil-rich areas in the rest of the world is not about acquiring the oil, but mandating that that oil only be sold for U.S. dollars around the world. The dollarification process. Back to the phones. Tom in Washington. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Earlier in your show today, you made a comment about cancer cures or the lack thereof, and I just wanted to comment on that and say that there's actually a lot of cancer cures out there. Nothing new. They've existed forever. And I know you cover a lot of articles from Natural News. Nothing new on that website, but there's also some websites out there that document some of those various cures.
We know our medical establishment doesn't want a cure for anything, because once you're cured of a disease, you're no longer a revenue stream. And for all the talk about we're searching for the cure for this and the cure for that, what they're really searching for are treatments that you will be on day after day, month after month, year after year for the rest of your life, because that is a reliable revenue stream. I know there are a lot of things that are very effective against cancer. Some of them are blocked in this country because they're not profitable enough. And now it's coming out that a lot of the minor cancers left untreated tend to go away by themselves. Your body does have a natural mechanism to deal with cancer. It's only the radiation and the conventional chemotherapy that will turn them into these metastatic monsters that cannot be stopped.
Yep, I agree. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, and thanks for your show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Switching over to Scott in Virginia. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Aloha. Listen, when you brought up John Kerry's background that he had or somebody on the show did, about him having a Jewish grandfather, the first thing I thought of was, remember Madeleine Albright when she was surprised at having a Jewish background when she became Secretary of State?
Yeah, I remember that one.
You know, somehow these folks who were supposed to get full background checks, you know, Kerry should have had a full background check when he was chairman in the Senate for the Foreign Relations Committee. And even before that, by handling top secret information. So there's no way that he could have been surprised years ago to find out about a Jewish grandfather.
It really totally is unbelievable. Most normal human beings have a sincere curiosity about their roots, about their ancestors. You know, I know a lot about my family background through all four grandparents. I think most people do. This idea that these politicians are completely surprised that their grandparents were this or that ethnicity, it really defies belief, in my opinion.
It does with me, and I can understand why they sometimes people would be worried about discrimination. You know, if they have a Jewish background, they may not want to have that last name. I can understand that. What I can't understand is lying about it.
Well, I mean, find me a politician who doesn't lie outside of Ron Paul and Cynthia McKinney and a handful of others. That's what they do all the time. I mean, Bill Clinton lied about not eating McDonald's until we caught him here on Oahu coming out of a McDonald's. It's their automatic response to present the best possible face to the public. And for most politicians, we saw starting, I think, about 3 campaigns ago where members of Congress, candidates for Congress, were running 2 websites, one for the Jewish donors and one for... And Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And sorry I ran off the end of the clock there. I wasn't paying attention. I was caught up in the hysteria of the moment here. Getting an interesting little story. Over in New York, Mayor Bloomberg is apparently not satisfied with banning the 2-liter sodas with pizzas. Now he's going after earbud headphones. He's launching a $250,000 social media crusade, warning people that loud music on their MP3 players can hurt their ears. Like we didn't already know that. Now, there are 50,000 people sleeping in homeless shelters in New York City. Thousands more who don't get to the shelters. And Bloomberg is on a rant against sugary drinks and now earbud headphones to try and make it look like he's relevant to what's going on to the lives of the New York City residents. Because that's what politicians do. They can't solve the real problems. So they're going to just sort of make up a crisis and solve that one in exchange for re-election and higher taxes. Global warming being the most obvious example of that. Now, getting back over to the Middle East, the United Nations has basically condemned the Israeli military for what they're calling institutionalized mistreatment of Palestinian children held in captivity. And they're saying the ill treatment of Palestinian minors held within the military detention system is widespread, systematic, and institutionalized. This is coming out of UNICEF. And of course, Israel will ignore it, as they have ignored so many other comments from the United Nations. And were some kind of a resolution to go to the Security Council, the United States would veto. And that's why Israel goes on doing what they're doing. It's a spoiled child. They do whatever they want. They never get punished. They're going to go on doing more. Meanwhile, in a village southwest of Bethlehem, on Monday, Israeli settlers uprooted almost 100 olive trees belonging to the Palestinians. Now, exporting olives and olive oil is a major industry in Palestine. And destroying the olive trees is a favorite activity of the Israeli settlers as an attempt to drive the Palestinians out. And apparently, this group of settlers was being guarded and protected by Israeli military forces while they went onto the Palestinians' land and destroyed these 100 trees, some of which were around 30 years old. Now, you need to understand something about olives. It takes 10 years after you plant an olive tree before you get a saleable, usable crop. And the Israeli military are protecting these settlers while they commit these acts of vandalism. And then Israel wonders why they're being seen as less and less legitimate around the world. Oh, it's still anti-Semites, it's blah, blah, blah. Get the Southern Poverty Law Center to scream that we're all being anti-Semites because we're concerned about Palestinian olives. And we ought to be. Believe it or not, there's actually an olive oil shortage. That was on CNN earlier today. Anyway. Now, maybe because of all these things that Israel is doing, there's kind of a little bit of cosmic intervention. Apparently, a locust swarm of biblical proportions has hit Israel. And it seems to be arriving just in time for Passover. They're estimating 30 million insects that had been devastating crops in Egypt have flown across the border. God's chosen, right? Maybe he's sending a message. Now, Ryan Dawson has launched a project where he's going to make a compilation video of people from around the world saying, stop all foreign aid to Israel. And that's all they say. And there is a video announcing that on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. I've already sent my video in. And he's basically going to montage it all together, sort of along the lines of some of these gun grabber commercials that you see. Oh, guns are bad. And then a new celebrity, oh, guns are bad. Oh, another celebrity, oh, guns are bad. And he's going to put that together. So you may want to look at his video, and you may wish to contribute. Meanwhile, over here in the Western Pacific, South Korea is saying they will retaliate if provoked by North Korea. Remember, only a couple of days ago, North Korea was saying that they would consider the ceasefire that has been in place for all these many decades to be over if North Korea continues to hold military exercises off the coast of North Korea. South Korea holding military. I get my Koreas mixed up here. But the situation is escalating. It's being provoked. The United States is over there exercising with South Korea, acting like they're getting ready to reinvade North Korea. China and Japan are still waving sabers at each other over those disputed islands. Can you feel the world being just pushed forward into this devastating global war for the money junkies? Now, a lot of people have been talking about, we even had a caller earlier in the show, about Eric Holder's admission that the president feels he has a legal right and foundation to assassinate Americans on U.S. soil. Now they're trying to backpedal and say, oh, it would only be used in the most extreme of circumstances, which is what they said when they started the drone strikes into other people's countries. But apparently, Attorney General Holder wrote a letter to Senator Rand Paul that the president could, in a, quote, entirely hypothetical, end quote, situation, authorize the military to use lethal force within the United States itself. There is no legal right for the president to do that. No man's life, liberty, or property may be taken other than through due process, and the president's whim is not due process. The only possible way to say the Constitution authorizes the president to use drone strikes against Americans is if Washington, D.C. sees itself as already at war with the other 50 states, which they do seem to be preparing for. Now, my concern about the drone strikes, the constitutional issues aside, and the denial of the targeted suspect of his day in court before a jury of his peers, and a demand of proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, is that these drone strikes in the other countries are taking out innocent civilians. And that means the president has declared a right to kill innocent Americans at his own discretion. That's what they're saying. Judge Napolitano is out there saying the first American to shoot down a drone will be an American hero. May not be necessary based on the performance of the drones in Yemen and Pakistan and elsewhere. A lot of them are falling out of the sky from manufacturing defects. And that's another problem with drones over the United States. If they're made to the same quality as these other drones, if they're made to the same quality as the Boeing Dreamliner, they're going to be falling out of the skies onto our roofs and onto our cars and onto our heads. And as I mentioned to that caller, it is entirely possible. If they're talking about drone strikes in America now, we cannot rule out the possibility they've already been happening. And we've had some very suspicious explosions of houses in the last few months that had people wondering. The excuse always was gas main explosion. In at least one of those cases, the gas company said, there's no gas main here. This is an all-electric neighborhood. What, the fuse box exploded and devastated the neighborhood? I'm not buying that one. Now, there's this interesting story. Anne Arundel County, the new Anne Arundel County executive, came into the main government building and discovered there was a video monitoring system with more than 500 cameras watching all the government buildings. The police didn't know it was there. This was a private little setup created by the new executive's predecessor, who left under a bit of a cloud and apparently was quite paranoid. But it underscores the fact there's video surveillance on everybody at all levels, including the government, much of it private, out of the control of any kind of oversight whatsoever. It's become an epidemic. We used to talk about how Britain was the most video spied on country on earth. It may be that the United States has just taken the gold from them. So let's talk about the gun grabbers here. We've talked a lot about how Kennesaw, Georgia, many years ago, passed a resolution that every home had to have a gun, and saw crime within their town fall, plummet, in fact. Now we're looking at the town of Nelson, Georgia. Got the inspiration from Kennesaw. They're looking at passing a resolution saying every homeowner in their town has to own a gun. And one of the reasons they're doing that is because of budget cuts. They only have one police officer who's only on duty for 8 hours a day, which means 16 hours a day, there's no police protection. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And apparently Rand Paul has launched his filibuster against the confirmation of John Brennan until he gets a definitive answer from the White House if, in fact, President Obama is arrogating to himself the right to murder Americans with drone strikes here inside the United States of America. And that is something that we need to know, because it betrays a seriously deranged attitude on the part of the president. Now, we all know that assassination is a reality of political life. But to openly admit as official policy that the president can order the execution of an American in an airstrike from the sky shows just how far away from the constitutional protections we have been taken by the current regime. Now, back to the gun grabbers. Down in Colorado, they're still having debates regarding these very strict gun laws they want to put through. They want to put severe limits on the capacity of the guns, even though it's already been proven that small capacity magazines will not seriously impede mass shooters whose brains are melted on SSRIs. As a side note, I'm a little concerned that more people are not going into these hearings to bring up this well-documented history of the link between prescription antidepressants and acts of otherwise completely inexplicable violence. But anyway, apparently down in Colorado, there was a rape victim who testified saying that we need to have guns to protect ourselves where the police will not. And apparently one of the Colorado lawmakers just did not want to hear this idea about people protecting themselves and literally berated her, saying the statistics are not on your side. Well, first of all, not only is he clueless, the statistics are on her side. Law-abiding Americans with legally owned firearms thwart 1.5 million crimes every single year. That's not a record the police can even come close to. But these politicians are so desperate to disarm you, they're going to lie. And some of the laws they're coming up with, see, now they're committed. We must do something about the crisis of guns. And as the population stands up and says, you leave our guns alone, the politicians are saying, well, we've got to do something to make it look like we're dealing with a situation. And some of these things are getting very absurd. Down in Florida, they're looking at passing a law that would require anybody wanting to buy bullets to first go through an anger management program to make sure that you will not lose your cool and do something embarrassing with your bullets. Well, again, getting back to that issue of the SSRIs, people who are on those medications are not under their own control. The problem with mass shootings is exactly the same thing as drunk driving. A chemical is causing responsible people to act irresponsibly. We were talking about that case out of Belgium that's gone to trial now, where the shooter was on these medications and he testified, I don't know why I did it. I felt programmed. I had no control. Now, remember the other day when Biden was saying just shoot through your front door with a shotgun to chase somebody out? Apparently down in Virginia Beach, Trevor Snowden followed Biden's advice. He fired the gun through the door after seeing 2 masked men by the window of his residence. He has been arrested and faces charges of reckless handling of a firearm. Thanks a lot, Joe. Good advice. Really good way to solve the problem here. Might take out a few pizza delivery people at the same time. Now, interesting thing, we've been talking about the actual statistics for death, about how you're much more likely to be killed by your own doctor or pharmacist than by an assault weapon. Well, here's a new one. The gun grabbers are out there screaming, we must protect the children, those poor school children. We must save them from this horrible, horrible death. The reality is, if you have a small child, they are 100 times more likely to die in your swimming pool than be shot by a gun. What are we going to do now? Ban swimming pools? Are we going to pass laws that make the manufacturers of swimming pools financially liable for the people who drown in them? They want your guns. They're desperate to get your guns. And if they get them, they'll be after your gold next, and after that, they'll be after your children for more wars. Now, the good news is women are buying guns. 25% of women are now pack heat. That's almost double since 2005. Good for you, girls. Handle them safely. Good for you. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And boy, the corporate media is laying it on thick regarding Hugo Chavez. A member at What Really Happened just posted a story talking about this Australian newspaper headline, "Death of a Ruthless Autocrat," and condemning him for being a socialist, which is corporate media speak for not willing to go along with the predations of private central banking and American-style financial manipulation. Somebody just sent me a scan of the front cover of the New York Post. Headline there is, "Venezuela Bully Chavez is Dead." So we're going to see a lot more of this. You can count on it. The U.S. government and the corporate media are going to try and build a case for why the United States must now go into Venezuela and make sure they do things the way the United States wants, meaning sell their oil only for dollars, and plus the gold and the uranium issue. We're in World War III, and the United States is the aggressor. We're the new Nazi empire. And I'm going to predict 50 years from now, the stars and bars are going to be as hated and reviled then as the swastika is now. Now, getting back to the gun issue and this insistence by this Colorado lawmaker that you can trust the police to take care of you and you don't need a firearm. Up in Chicago, there was an incident where the police kicked down yet another wrong door and literally terrorized an 11-month-old. Get your hands up, get your hands up. And apparently there were 6 children in this apartment who were all traumatized by this. And the cops were screaming at them, "This is what happens when your grandma sells crack." Whatever happened to protect and to serve? I guess these days it's we treat you like a king. And that's a problem. They kick down the wrong doors. And if you are a law-abiding citizen in your home and you have done nothing wrong, and the police are kicking down your door, you have a right to defend your home against an unlawful intrusion with lethal force. And the Supreme Court already ruled on this in John Bad Elk versus the United States. If your civil rights are being violated by the police, you have a right to fight back. They want to take away your ability, but you have a right to fight back. March 15th of this month is going to be the International Day Against Police Brutality. Apparently this is going viral because we have seen so much police brutality in this age of cameras and cell phone cameras being everywhere and ubiquitous. The cops used to get away with this stuff. They can't anymore. They're very unhappy about it. And police are still trying to bluff civilians, saying it's against the law if you videotape or take pictures. We'll take your camera. We'll smash it. And again, the courts have ruled repeatedly you have a First Amendment right to videotape public employees, which includes the police, out in public doing what they're doing. And if they're doing something illegal and unconstitutional, you have a right to take that video and make it public. Because the government isn't going to hold these police in check unless there's a public stink about it. Whenever a tyranny comes into power, the first thing they do is they send out a message to the police. You can do whatever you want. You will not be prosecuted. You will be protected. Because your job is no longer law enforcement, it's order. It's repression of the people, so they don't stand up. And that's what all of these assaults on the Occupy protesters have been about. By the way, some of the Occupy protesters that were being charged for various terrorism-related offenses, the judge has basically said they're not guilty. So they walked away from that attempt to frame them up here. Now, right now, the new political enemy of the state appears to be leakers, hackers, and activists. And we're literally seeing a propaganda war run up against them. The Southern Poverty Law Center is out with their new report on hate and extremism, warning that conspiracy-minded anti-government groups has reached an all-time high in 2012. Well, as the government goes bad, the percentage of people in the population who are going to be opposed to that government, understandably, is going to go up. The SPLC report isn't telling us anything that wouldn't be anticipated by any student of history. And Southern Poverty Law Center is out there basically taking the position that no reasonable human being could ever find fault with the government, and therefore all these conspiracy-minded anti-government groups and websites, and I am proud to be one of them, represent a threat to the nation that must be dealt with. So the demonization is beginning. And maybe this is in response to that Rasmussen report from a week back, that more people are now coming here to the independent media than the corporate media. We are the new mainstream. That's why I won't call the corporate media the mainstream media anymore. They're not the mainstream. They still have all the money, but they only have a minority share of the audience out there. Let's see. Oh, here's the story I was just referring to. 12 Occupy activists were initially found guilty of what is called defiant trespass by Municipal Court President Judge Marcia H. Neafield and fined $500 each plus court costs. However, under Philadelphia law, those found guilty in municipal court have the right to a new trial in common pleas court. So that's going to move forward here. Now, there's an article at whatreallyhappened.com you may want to take a look at, and the headline is Commotion Wireless. This is a grassroots project, and I think we need to be paying attention to it. They are putting together a set of software for smartphones, tablets, and laptops that will transform all of these devices in an urban area where you're reasonably close to each other. It's not a long-range system. But within a city, if enough people have this software on their smartphones, their laptops, and their tablets, they can still communicate with each other even if the government shuts off internet access and the cell phone system itself. It basically uses the Bluetooth that is in all these devices to create a peer-to-peer packet switching network. So if I'm on one end of the city and I want to send a text message to my wife saying that I love her very much, I type it in my smartphone, it hunts the nearest phone to it, jumps to there, and basically works its way forward. And there's a routing table set up that keeps track of where people are, and it's able to link all these devices together where the device is the network. You don't need the internet, you don't need Wi-Fi. I take that back. It's using Wi-Fi as well in the peer-to-peer mode, not Bluetooth. I misspoke. But it's using the Wi-Fi to basically leap from device to device. The devices are the network, and it functions independently of the cell phone system and the existing traditional internet. And as a means for lawful protests to organize themselves, when the cell phone connections are cut, we know the government has already developed the infrastructure to do that. This is something that you need to seriously look at. Going to go to the phones here. Danny in South Carolina. Aloha, Danny. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I was calling about something different, but since you mentioned what you just mentioned, the early Gibson books where the term, the Matrix and all that came from.
Yes.
Going back many years. He envisioned this day, and he created a scenario where basically the Internet had become a series of independent networks, and you know, anybody with a wireless system at home, you can usually see your neighbor's wireless. If you set up, if you know how to do it, if you go into your router and set it up as an ad hoc network, you can then do exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You can make your own internet, you know, local, regional, whatever, and there are people working on it. I'm glad to hear you mention it on the air. Anyway, we do have the technology. What I was going to call about is I'm very disturbed here because I'm reading this bill here on JTA, on the Jewish Times, and they're, of course, bragging about this bill to make Israel a major strategic ally. But it goes on in this article to say that it includes, it says, quote, the bill codifies a number of existing facets of the U.S.-Israel relationship, including annual defense assistance and cooperation on missile defense and energy research, and a program that waives prearranged visas for select nationals entering the United States.
Mm-hmm.
By select nationals, I take it they mean Israelis, meaning all they've got to do is,
ask
they
for
don't
it.
have to.
Yeah.
Yes, just waive your passport and come on in. I mean, this is just so predictable, and it's so dangerous. And I don't really know. I mean, I've written my usual letter off to my senator, but it ain't going to do no good.
No, probably not. We're seeing from Hagel and from AIPAC and our Congress, 90% of them are working for Israel. And they're going to give Israel whatever Israel wants, including the life of your children in a war against Iran.
What do we do?
Well, at this point, we just really are going to have to sit it out and wait for the economy to crash. And about the only active thing we can do besides talking to each other about what's going on is to possibly, start pulling our money out of the system. And I know the Federal Reserve is just printing up new money, but anything we can do to de-link from that central economy is probably going to accelerate the process. Frankly, I think if you had stock that you might want to seriously consider getting out of the stock market. We know the insiders in Wall Street are dumping their stock, and the big massive sell-off that I've been talking about maybe already be starting, where the insiders get their money and the rest of us are left with, empty paper.
Just as an aside, Michael, that my brother is a contractor in Atlanta. His wife is a real estate broker. And from what he tells me now, her business has really picked up. Most of her clients are Israelis, and they are buying up Atlanta.
Well, I would almost expect, we were talking earlier about these wholesale foreclosure sales where foreclosed homes are going to be sold in huge blocks. I would almost expect we're going to see Israelis coming in because...
well, that's what it sounds like to me, and the only thing they need now is to be able to walk in the country without a visa and welcome to the 51st state.
Well, the visa for the Israelis is almost a joke. They're never denied. It's just they go through the process and it's granted, and it's an open door policy, and we're being Zionified over here in the United States of America, and again the Israelis are training our police departments, which is why they're treating us like Palestinians. And the next thing you're going to see is these big, tall concrete walls going up, separating off the really nice parts of the country from the rest, and we'll be shoved over to live in the desert, the same way the Palestinians are. That's obviously the agenda.
Say it ain't so, Michael.
I wish I could. I wish I could. But again, I think we're on the verge of a gigantic economic upheaval, which is going to basically bring down these private central banks and the U.S. government, and without the U.S. government as a major military support for Israel, Israel's going to have to all of a sudden develop a case of humble and learn how to get along with their neighbors.
You think they can do that, Michael?
It's going to be hard. It doesn't seem to be in the nature of the Israeli government to get along with anybody.
No. Well, all right, man. Thanks a lot.
All right, you got it. Now then, the carbon Nazis are still at it. They're out there screaming that carbon dioxide levels have shown the biggest spike in 15 years, and this proves global warming, and blah, 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 blah. Well, obviously it doesn't. We're in the middle of another harsh winter. We know global temperatures have been in decline for close to 10 years now. 10 years ago, the global warming experts said snow would be a thing of the past. That didn't happen. And now they're saying carbon dioxide is up at a time when the world is obviously getting colder. The whole Al Gore premise linking human-caused carbon dioxide to global warming is utterly destroyed. And they're still out there trying to sell this lemon to the people of the world. They want their carbon taxes. They want you to agree to live in little tiny shoeboxes for the good of Mother Earth. They want you obedient to a global environmental authority that will tell you how much fuel you can use, how often you can use your air conditioning. They want complete control over your life, and they're trying to sell it to you on the idea that it's good for planet Earth, even as they lay waste to large swaths of planet Earth with depleted uranium and napalm and all of these other weapons that they have up there. Global warming is at best a failed theory, and at worst it was a hoax, a conspiracy, a fraud to trick you out of your carbon taxes and into obedience. Now the good news is this massive winter storm that has struck the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states and is into the Midwest now. It's shut down the federal offices in Washington, D.C. So huzzah, huzzah, let's hear it for the snowstorm. And how absurd it is to see the government still pushing global warming when they can't even get into work because of the snow. It's just absurd. CDC has issued a warning of yet another deadly antibiotic-resistant bacteria that is apparently inside the U.S. healthcare system, and it's apparently quite lethal. If you get it, it can kill up to half the patients who get bloodstream infections from the disease. The disease has evolved a resistance to carbapenems, which are the last resort most powerful antibiotics. And apparently this CRE bacteria can transfer its resistance to other bacteria within its same similar family. I know when antibiotics first came along, they were being treated like Roundup. Oh, it'll do wonders, it'll kill the weeds, and that'll be the end of it. And the weeds came back and evolved a resistance to Roundup, and so have the bacteria. The weeds are now more difficult to deal with. These bacteria are more difficult to deal with. This is what happens when money junkies throw the science out there without considering its long-term ramifications. The CDC said most of the people getting these infections are people receiving significant medical care in hospitals, long-term acute care facilities, and nursing homes. Going to take a break for commercials. Back in a bit. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm getting to be a real big fan of Cracked.com. And outgrowth of the original magazine, which when I was a kid, Cracked was considered sort of a second runner to Mad Magazine. But Cracked has a lot of very good articles on current social issues. And I linked to one called 5 Famous Online Copyright Crusaders Who Are Total Hypocrites. And it basically goes in and it lists out these 5 cases where people are out there getting a lot of publicity and a lot of attention, screaming about copyright protection, turn out to be some of the worst offenders themselves. They're talking about how the man who sponsored the Stop Online Protection Act was introduced by U.S. Representative Lamar Smith. And it turned out that he was basically using materials for his website without permission. And it goes on, various musicians, and it's certainly worth a look because it portrays this attitude among the elites of do as we say, don't do as we do. That is really a key part of the rot of any society. When the rulers decide or declare they're not bound by the same rules as the people, society becomes destabilized. When the United States was started as a nation under law, everybody was subject to those laws, up to and including the president himself, were bound by the law. When you get into this imperial attitude of the laws are only for the hoi polloi, for the workers, to keep order, and that above a certain level you can lie, cheat, steal, and murder and get away with it because you are above a certain level in society, society becomes unstable. It's the same model they had back in the medieval period, where the nobility were not punished for the same crimes that the peasants were. It's a bad, bad sign. Everybody's talking about what's going on over there at the Vatican. People are screaming about the child molestation scandal, as well they should. And activists are calling for certain cardinals, rather, to not be considered for pope because of their link in with this vast cover-up. They still have not scheduled when conclave will start. And interestingly enough, you probably saw this on the other day, a man dressed up as a bishop, phony, sneaked into the meeting of the cardinals in the Vatican on Monday. Got his picture taken with him before the Swiss guards finally realized he wasn't supposed to be there. Guy named Ralph Napierski. And his costume wasn't even all that convincing, and he still got in there. Ah, good for him. Let's see. Copyright infringement is now the new terrorism. And that's true. The reason for the Department of Homeland Security to scan your phones and laptops and tablets within 150 miles of a border, two-thirds of the American population, has nothing to do with terror. They're enforcing copyrights. That's what they're doing. That's the music. We're going to get out of here and get some errands done. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed, make good choices. Speak out, because when you have the courage to speak out, you give others the courage to speak out as well. Aloha, America.